Hey guys, what's going on? Thomas Grabowski here, and today we're going to be cooking some butternut squash soup. Grab your forks and knives and let's get cooking. Alright, so for this recipe you're going to need 1 butternut squash, some organic carrots, organic celery, half a white onion, organic extra virgin olive oil, 1.5 liter of vegetable broth, here I have 2, some salt and pepper, and for spices I'm going to use some turmeric, and optional you can use some spicy paprika or cumin as well, but I'll just use turmeric for this recipe. Okay, so to start this recipe, we're going to begin by prepping our vegetables. I'm going to start with cutting 1 onion in half. Once it's cut in half, I'm going to cut it in half one more time. Now what you're going to want to do is remove the skin and finally slice the onion, and we're going to start to cook the onion. You can use half an onion if you want, but for this recipe I'm only going to use a 1/4 cup. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set a 5 liter, about 5 liters, it could be 4 to 5 liter pot. It doesn't have to be exactly 5 liters, but about 4 to 5 liter pot, or just a large pot, onto medium-high heat on a stovetop. And I'm simply going to add 1 to 2 tablespoons of extra virgin organic olive oil. Once your pot starts to heat up and you start seeing a little bit of smoke, add your onions into the pot. Saute for about 1 to 2 minutes. So in this case I'm going to use some simply organic turmeric, and I'm going to add 1 to 2 teaspoons of this into the onions to add a little bit of flavor. I added about half a teaspoon here. You can add more, but I'm just going to add a little bit now, and I'll probably add a little bit more when I'm adding the more vegetables. What I really want to do is just saute the onions and make sure that they have a nice brown to them. Once you're done, turn off the pot, and we're going to prepare the other vegetables, and we're going to add that to the pot as well. What I would usually do is cut all the vegetables first and then throw them in the pot. For this instance, I just want to show you how to saute the onions. Very simple. You just slice the onions like I showed you, put them in the pot, and then add some spices. Now we're going to add the rest of the vegetables to the mix as well. So I'm going to start with some carrot. We're going to peel the carrots. Typically I would use only 1 carrot for this recipe, but my carrots look a little bit skinny, so I'm going to add 2. Okay, so what I simply did, I cut the carrot in half here, and I have these little pieces, so you can kind of discard them or eat them or save them for later. What you kind of want is kind of like a medium-sized carrot, so if you get one that's kind of consistent and large, I mean, it doesn't really matter because this will get blended, but just if this wasn't a recipe that was blended, it's just a good habit to get into cutting pieces that are consistent, so you just kind of have a similar size of vegetable or whatever that you're going to eat, so that it's just going to have, it's just going to be nice and balanced, because that's what we're really shooting for here, is balance with every single one of these recipes, keeping it healthy and keeping them in general balance. So really keep that in mind when you are cooking. Once your carrots have been cut in half, now we're just going to cut them into about 1-inch pieces, and we're going to throw them into a bowl that's going to go later into the steel pot, and we're going to mix all the vegetables and warm them up. So next we're going to prep some celery stalk. So I'm only going to use 1 for this recipe. You could use 2, but I think 2 would be a little bit too much. We're just adding this for a little bit of flavor. Remember, the squash is going to be the big star player in this recipe, but this is going to be a nice addition to add a little bit of that savory, kind of freshness and that kind of vibrancy and that celery-like flavor to the recipe. It's going to make it a little more lighter, so we're going to throw this in here, just 1 bell. Last but not least in our preparation, we're going to get 1 butternut squash, and we're going to add this into the recipe as well. So in order to prepare a butternut squash, we're going to have to take the skin off, and then we're going to have to cube it. So I'm going to start by cutting off the top and the bottom ends. And then you have 2 options here. So since this is a pretty even squash, I'm going to just take a peeler and peel the skin off while it's intact whole. So just a side note, peeling a butternut squash can be a pain in the butt. So if you are struggling peeling this as it is whole, like I said, you can just cut this in half like this, lengthwise or widthwise, and then you can peel both sides individually. An easier way to do this is by purchasing some frozen butternut squash, but it's not going to taste as good. So I promise you this is going to be the good stuff. It's definitely going to be worth it. Let's get to cutting this guy up now. So I try to get, again, the butternut squash into these kind of bite-sized pieces. I got these little squares. What you really want to focus is on evenness, just so they can thoroughly cook. Now when cubing up the bottom half, you may come into an issue. You're going to have some seeds here. So just use a big spoon and remove that, kind of like you would a pumpkin, because the squash is a pumpkin from the pumpkin family. So just use a spoon to remove that, and then you can save that or throw it out and then cut the rest into cubes. Alright, and when you're done, you should have something like this. So after you have all your vegetables prepared, you should have your carrots, celery, and squash all cut up into about equal-sized cubes. What you're just going to simply do is add that into the pot and cook the vegetables for about 4 to 5 minutes just to soften them up just a little bit. Another thing, depending on the size of your squash, remember we're always aiming for balance whenever we're cooking. So as I'm mixing these vegetables, I realize that there's not enough celery in here, so I'm actually going to take another stalk of celery, chop it up, and I'm going to add it into the bowl. Again, I'm just adding another handful of celery to the pot. I'm also going to add a little bit garlic to the recipe. So after about 3 to 5 minutes, you're going to have a nice browning to the carrots and the squash and the celery. And the squash should actually kind of turn a darker orange color. Once you start seeing a little coloring all around the squash evenly, and you kind of see that it's kind of cooked a little bit, we're going to add in some bone broth. So I simply added about 6 cups of vegetable broth. You can use bone broth as well if you made it. I have a recipe for that as well. Now I'm simply going to season the soup with some salt and pepper. And I'm going to put the soup to a boil. After my water has reached a rolling boil, I just set the temperature to a low setting, and then I set a timer for 45 minutes and put a nice snug lid onto the pot. I'm going to wait for 45 minutes afterwards to see if the soup is ready. So after about 45 minutes, your soup should be ready. I let the soup cool off for about 15 to 20 minutes before I put it into the blender. Simply use a ladle to scoop in the soup into the blender and then blend it on high for 1 to 2 minutes. So after I blended some of the soup, I'm just going to add a little bit more of the chunks. It looks like it can still have some room to fit in here. Just continue doing this process until you've blended all of the vegetables, and you're going to have yourself a delicious, nutritious butternut squash soup. Alright, and that's the video, guys. Hope you guys enjoyed that recipe. If you want to see more, feel free to follow, like, and subscribe on my YouTube channel. Thanks for following the video, guys. Thanks for liking, and I really appreciate your support. 1.5 cup